Hey everyone, Anark here, and this is another episode of Anark Responds. This video series is one where I go back to previous videos and I sort of make a selection of comments that I think are interesting or make good points or perhaps are just argumentative or ones that I think are kind of funny. And then I respond to them here on a video for everyone to see. The video that we're going to be talking about today is a video called After the Revolution, which is one I made relatively early in my YouTube career. In fact, earlier than the previous video series that we were looking at, which was The State is Counter-Revolutionary. After the Revolution is a video where essentially I lay out a theoretical future anarchist society. And it's interesting because the video has been generally very well received, but it's also been a little bit polarizing. Some people have made comments and criticisms about it in the years since I published it, including people who are anarchists. So we'll be seeing some of those comments today, but to begin with, I'm going to start with one that exemplifies why I created After the Revolution to begin with. So this person says, lateralist says, this is just what I've been craving, a more in-depth and concrete proposal for model of an anarchist society. Like you said, we mostly tend to talk about the flaws of capitalism rather than present a fleshed out alternative, allowing that kind of bad system, but the best we have kind of mentality to go largely unchallenged, at least for a lot of people. The system you presented seems quite solid. It's hard to imagine ways for individuals or groups to exploit it. I'm curious, what are some good resources on the topic of post-revolution? I know Anarchy Works goes into a good amount of detail, though I haven't finished it yet. So, off the bat here, you can see why I presented this one. I won't probably be talking about too many of these positive comments, maybe a few that kind of ask questions. In general, I kind of prefer to answer the more argumentative or skeptical comments on these videos. But that first part is exactly why I created After the Revolution. In fact, it kind of starts with this discussion of just that topic. And that is, we have a lot of people who are doing very good critique. They're very good at pointing out what is wrong with capitalism, what has been wrong with previous systems, but they are not very good at presenting an alternative, at presenting something which actually seems feasible and like we could implement it and that it would work and that it would be different somehow. In fact, that topic of whether what I'm presenting here is actually fundamentally different is something that will pop up in some of these comments. But yeah, what I say at the beginning of this video and what I say in a lot of my videos, in fact, is that I think we need an equal mixture of a constructive and deconstructive mentality. We need to be able to critique, but we also need to be able to build. We need to give people something to hope and fight for, just as much as we need to give people an understanding that the system we've currently got is insufficient. Now, as for the second part where they ask a question, do you have any materials you can recommend about post-revolution? The truth is, precisely as I just said, the majority of the left spends all its time on deconstruction or criticism and spends very little of its time actually trying to propose an alternative system. But I feel sort of duty-bound to discuss the few exceptions to that. One of those exceptions that I feel I absolutely have to mention is Michael Albert's Paracon, or participatory economics. In fact, Michael Albert is pretty much on the same, is basically saying the same thing I just said there a second ago, which is that we need to have as much constructive vision as we have a sort of deconstructive or critical vision. And so Michael Albert and his partner, or not partner, I guess, in the romantic partner, but theoretical partner, Hanel, they have created a very good model for a possible system wherein the workers are empowered, wherein we prevent the rise of an administrative authority, and yet it works. It actually distributes resources properly. It can make decisions and so on. Now, I will say, I think what they've got is something that is a little more of an economy than it is necessarily a broader system of government, but what they've done is nonetheless very impressive. That is about all you're going to find. There is really not a whole lot of people trying to do what I did here in this video. And partly it's because, as you'll see in these comments, people love to nitpick and take every little thing apart as soon as you actually produce a vision of what we might achieve. This person, cool pick person, says, thank you for laying out the tenets of anarcho-anarchism. I included this one just for the sake of saying that, you know, mostly what I'm presenting, especially in these older videos, is really not something unique to me as a theoretical, you know, mind. In fact, what I'm laying out, and I kind of say this at the beginning of the video, and I know I don't want to take this too seriously, but some people have kind of intimated this same fact. What I lay out at the beginning is kind of just an example of what was happening with the CNT-FAI in Spain, a kind of an example of the beginning of democratic confederalism, the base ideas of democratic confederalism as seen in Rojava. Some amount of it, you know, it's a little more technical than some of these examples. You know, it has differences. Some amount of it also matches the Zapatistas. So, you know, I could see how somebody looks at this and thinks, oh my God, somebody's actually presenting a system here. This must be uniquely different. In fact, some people make the mistake of thinking I've provided something radically different from things which have already been tried or proposed. But, you know, it's a humorous comment. So that's also partly why I included it. So Anthony 9057 says, I found this video extremely convincing and sorely needed. I've always been amicable to our anarchist thought, but I don't get a lot of time, and whenever I would ask anarchists online basic questions about how their system would work, it felt overly vague and badly argued. This is the direct and specific response to many of those questions. Thank you so much for this. Yeah, so this one is kind of, you know, belaboring that first point. You know, that is the reason why this video was created, was partially because, unfortunately, even as an anarchist, I have to agree that most anarchists sort of just kind of hand wave this question. Oh, I don't want to create blueprints. Oh, you know, we're not creating utopian visions of the future. You know, the people will have to figure it out when we get there. Yeah, I mean, I get that. I understand why people are saying that, but this is kind of a common refrain you'll find on this channel, is that I think that's a really unconvincing argument, and that in a general sense, when you are, you know, going through a revolution or you are militantly opposing the state, you can't just figure it out on the spot. You know, managing a society, you know, whether it is in a horizontal sense or hierarchical sense, is not something you're just going to be able to figure out on the spot while you're at war with the rest of the world. You know, when you have an elaborate hierarchical machinery trying to destroy you, you're not going to just figure it out on the spot. You need some kind of model to look to and say, this is kind of seems like a good structure for us to follow. You know, if we implemented this, it seems like it would be functional. And then whatever, iterate on it as you please. But you're going to need something to look at and say, this is the sort of model we'd like to put in place. And if you just try to conceive of it within, you know, short order of a few days or something, you're probably not going to create a very robust system. You're going to create a system that has a lot of weird loopholes and inconsistencies in the things you've determined, and you're going to be forced to work them out while you have a world-spanning hierarchical machine trying to destroy you. I don't advocate that. I think that's a bad idea. I think that we need at least kind of a basis to start from in order to then be able to iterate and make those decisions. But we need something that is at least feasible as a base model. So this person's commenting because towards the beginning of the video, I sort of, you know, make a disparaging comment about managers, but they say, Metal Nick says, What you said about managers hits home. I've worked mostly in the food industry when I've been employed, and I regularly had experiences working under managers that actively or passively make decisions that risk hurting the business. Whether it's authoritative managers who enforce inefficient policies, or ones who fail to look after the business and address abusive employees or other managers, and just want to act like everyone's best friend. It always seems like a backward hierarchy. The last place I worked got a serious health code violation because the manager didn't want to play the role of meeting those basic guidelines. Apparently because it meant playing a leadership role and telling employees what health standards they must meet. It doesn't mean I agree with the hierarchy. There could be specialization as opposed to direct authoritative control, but clearly following health code guidelines is an essential part of running a business. Yeah, so I won't get into the, addressing the specific there, but the truth is that anytime you concentrate power like that, the place you concentrated power is a failure point. You have to trust that the right person will be put into that position, and you have to trust that that person can do the position in a way which is actually efficient and doesn't harm people. And sadly, what we find in reality is just that generally people are not fit to dominate others, pretty much nobody, I would argue. And when they are put in that position, they are forced to do a huge menagerie of things, which are highly inefficient. And they're often even bad at doing the things which would be good, which they have been tasked with doing. And that's because generally your managers, and this is more the case the higher up the chain you go, have little understanding of what it's like to actually do the job on the ground, that very, very first person activity of what makes the enterprise function. They're not familiar with that because they, in a general sense, either have not done it, or even if they have done it, no longer do it because they are now doing managerial or administrative tasks. So what that means is they have very bad advice about what to do. And when you tell them, hey, this is how things actually function, I know that you were told by your boss you need to do X, but in reality, that's just not how this works, and we need to do this instead. They're not going to be responsive to that. And if they are, they'll probably get fired. So yeah, absolutely. Decisions that are made from the bottom up are more efficient and are more grounded in reality. And so, that's why you want to develop consensus systems. That's why you want to develop horizontality. That's why you want to create decentralized decision-making networks, because those are actually better oriented in the reality of what it is to operate in those positions than those in managerial positions. So Globalist Potato says, I'm really enjoying this video series, subscribed waiting to see more constructive content. I've been wondering about revolution in an American context. If America went socialist, it would change the world, but America has a declining but still large middle class who has been fairly successful under capitalism. Basically, my parents, who worked in a unionized workplace and made a good living off their labor, bought a house, have part of their retirement invested in the stock market. I hear anti-Bernie propaganda creating fear of people's retirements or housing going bye-bye under his proposals. Want to counteract this. Oh, I'm not sure that sentence was a complete sentence, but while they are a small portion of the human population, I feel like I would prefer to have my parents in solidarity rather than opposition and revolution. Any thinkers or resources you've seen addressing this issue? So here's the thing. Many thinkers have discussed the fact that capitalism essentially bribes a portion of the population in order to fight for their own subjugation and the subjugation of their fellow people. This led to the formulation of these sort of further class delineations, such as the petit bourgeois or the lumpen proletariat or whatever. And I remember when I looked at the comment here, I responded something about how this is what was called the petit bourgeois, but that's actually not quite correct. Insofar as that you're in a union family and you're a worker and all you've done is, you've got somewhat successful through a union. That's actually not the case. I wouldn't characterize that as the petit bourgeois, but I would say it is the middle class. And capitalism fights to create a middle class because that middle class is a sort of example of social and economic stability that the system proposes that it can offer. And therefore, it sort of acts as both a way to bribe those people that are within the middle class, and it creates an aspirational vision, which people who are not in the middle class, or to say the lower class, can fight for that aspirational middle class vision. That being said, regardless of the fact that the middle class is not necessarily synonymous with the petite bourgeois, it is usually a place where reaction takes place. And by reaction, I mean the insurgence of sort of regressive or fascistic mentalities. And this is because they are now invested in the hierarchical power structure continuing. And so they might also be very susceptible to being told that that hierarchical power is good, and that those who are trying to overturn the current society and create a revolutionary or liberatory society are actually their enemies, and they're trying to take away their livelihood. And they sometimes will go on to then fight for their own subjugation and the subjugation of others. So unfortunately, when it comes to actually messaging to these people, it pretty much just boils down to arguing the points in good faith and trying to have a honest discussion with them, trying to get them to side with fellow laborers rather than the ruling class, which is subjugating them, trying to get them to realize that maybe they have worked their way into the middle class, but their allegiances should still lie with the workers, not with the rulers. So unfortunately, it can be very challenging. And I think this characterizes a lot of the split between the millennials and the Zoomers and the boomers. The boomers, a lot of them attained middle class status, and therefore they have these sort of regressive or conservative views a lot of the time. Whereas those who are millennials or Zoomers, very few of us have ever attained middle class status, and therefore reactionary viewpoints are much less common in our generations. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. In a way, it's sort of just characteristic of that generational divide. So Skeptical Leftist, who is another small anarchist content creator I've included here, they said, with quality videos like this and comprehensive explanations of how things work, it still astonishes me that I encounter so many bad faith criticisms of anarchism. Yeah, well, I think most people probably haven't seen a video like this, right? Like I said, the sad truth is that not many anarchists are even attempting to create works like this. They're kind of stuck in an orthodoxy, and the orthodoxy is that you're not allowed to create blueprints. You're not allowed to try to create a vision of a future society, because that's utopianism, or that's utopian socialism. Which, leads us to being susceptible to demagogues and authoritarians of various kinds. So yeah, go subscribe to Skeptical Leftist. He does video interviews, but he also does a book club, does book reviews and discussions with his fellow creators. So go subscribe to his channel. He has a very small channel. It's been growing pretty slowly as well, so you could probably use your subscription. So Derek Bindell says, I was all ready to leap into the comments voicing concerns that you didn't address the abolition of markets or money, and then you moved right in with really good points about how this could serve as a training ground for further action. Good job on the foresight. So I actually included this one not because it's a compliment, but instead because a lot of people have commented on the fact that this video contains descriptions of a market, and that I am not just fully advocating in this video for just out and out anarcho-communism. And I included this comment as a way to kind of remind people, and I think this will probably come up when I respond to further comments, what is in this video after the revolution. You shouldn't see it as my vision of a perfect utopian society where everything is handled. And you shouldn't see it as a vision of anarcho-communism. Instead, you should see it as the vision of what we might create right after we had some very significant rupture with the previous order of things. That we haven't, done a global revolution. We've done maybe something that is more like a national or a regional revolution. And we now have control over an autonomous territory. And we have to live in the aftermath of that live trying to push forward a liberatory society, and we have to continue to withstand the attacks of the mega machine, as I call it, globally, right? After the revolution is my answer to, if we were to build something that can weather that, what would it look like? So it is not, in fact, the exact end goal. I would say it is a sort of intermediate goal. And my work, A Modern Anarchism, actually clarifies this a little further. And I believe I also included that description or included that fact in the introduction to the version that is published on Anarchist Library. So this should not be seen as the ultimate end goal. This is a sort of intermediary. As this person says here, it is a training ground for further action. This is the society which could weather all of those pressures, while also creating the foundations where people could decide how to move forward into the future. It still would create a cooperative society where consensus would be, or modified consensus, as we'll discuss here in a minute, would still determine the future of society. So yeah, it's sort of an intermediary, revolutionary intermediary between here and the final goal. Richard Faulkner says, "This is the first of your videos I've seen, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks very much. Do you think it is possible to move iteratively toward a structure like this or an otherwise satisfactory decentralized system without the need for violent overthrow and upheaval? Revolution," they say. My simple answer is no. The current structure would never allow us to create something like what's in After the Revolution. We can't even get the structures which exist any place on Earth to just have proper regulations on corporations and to just create sufficient welfare programs that are not constantly backsliding. The idea that we're going to somehow gain enough parliamentary advantage in order to iteratively move towards what is described in this video is impossible, in my opinion. In fact, so this is what motivates my prefigurative conception. And I'm not the only one. Most anarchists have this idea that what we are trying to do is build the new in the shell of the old. So a lot of what's in After the Revolution, you will find the precursors in the things that I propose we do right now, right? So, that market component. That's why I actually do support cooperatives. Yeah, I know they're not perfect, but we're going to need them in this interim period where we're moving towards communism. It's the reason why that we need, free stores and various forms of direct distribution. It's the reason why we need to start making neighborhood councils right now, because this is us creating these precursors that will later go on to develop into something like what is seen in After the Revolution. We're prefiguring the structures that will be like a vessel into the next world. And so insofar as we're saying, iteratively doesn't mean using the state, then yeah, that's exactly what I'm proposing, right? It is iterative because we're creating the first, components of this in the here and now. But insofar as that we're going to get the state to do it, or we're going to get the power structures that be to slowly transform into it, that I believe is a complete pipe dream that is in every way just refuted by the examples of history. All right, so we got some long ones in here. Okay, so you're going to have to, I'm going to obscure my pretty face with these comments, but this one is from the Red King 247. While I have some criticisms, like how do you prevent justice from becoming a popularity contest where those who are charismatic enough can just get away with bad actions that harm the community or specific individuals in it, which is absolutely terrifying to think about, I do appreciate that fundamentally you're trying to provide at least some kind of picture for how an anarchist society could look without devolving back into some other form of oppressive society. I've long had a problem with anarchist thought, and that the vast majority of it is on how to achieve a revolution rather than how we should organize afterwards, which has pushed me away from anarchism as a whole, because fundamentally a system that cannot answer the question, how do you deal with the next revolution, is inevitably going to collapse, and likely a worse one will come out of it. Having democratic systems where citizens can reform their society seems to be the strongest defense against that, though, so your model at least passes that. So yeah, this person, pretty well, once again, they're kind of understanding the point that I've discussed in a few of these other comments, that that's the point of this, is to create something that is actually a possible model for that interim society. However, I do think that they make a really good criticism here when they say, how do you prevent justice from becoming a popularity contest where those who are charismatic enough can just get away with bad actions that harm the community or specific individuals in it, which is absolutely terrifying to think about. I second that. It is terrifying to think about. And the answer is, I think that's actually kind of an eternal problem in every sort of system. We even see in this system, one which claims that justice is blind, we still see people that are very powerful getting away with the things they're doing. Justice does not appear to be blind. It appears to see money very clearly. And those with power are essentially able to avoid the accountability for their actions, even in the current system. So I don't want to pretend that the sort of rudimentary description of justice councils that I've laid out in this video is in any way going to counteract or prevent these problems from taking place. But what I would like to suggest is that because the system proposes consensus and other mechanisms for intervening minorities to create councils that can veto harmful proposals, that you may have some mechanisms which will prevent this from taking place. So I'll clarify, because I think I discuss it in the comments to another, or in the responses to another comment, and I haven't really included that here. And it's only very briefly discussed in the video. But, okay, so looking at, this will come up again, and I'll try not to reiterate too much, but what you can do is you can create councils that represent the minorities. So let's say this person, that has harmed somebody, but is very charismatic and is winning through a popularity contest. Let's say they've carried out violence towards women. Or even say that, they've carried out sort of like racist violence. In both of those occasions, there is a minority, or not a minority, but there is an oppressed population, which should be able to intervene to prevent this oversight, right? In one case, it would be women. Assuming that, of course, the perpetrator is male and the victims are female and so on. And in the other occasion, it would be those who are the victim of that racial violence. Rojava actually has an interesting answer to the question. What they say is you create a council of those oppressed peoples, and they can intervene on decisions that are being made, and they can either veto them or they can, complicate the process, making it more difficult, and possibly bringing more accountability to the party in question. I think this is a great answer. The other answer is, of course, if you do full consensus, it's going to be, that minority or that constituency is not going to allow that person to escape accountability. If it's full consensus, if we get to 100%, which of course the percentage will be discussed in further comments, then 100% would disallow that from happening. Especially in the case of women, which consist about 50% of the population. But even in the occasion of most what we call racial minorities, most of the time they are not that much of a minority. We keep calling them minorities, for example, in American society, and they're actually not a minority. Non-white people are the majority in the United States. So that would not be possible for the person that was committing racial violence like that to just get away with it. They would just never arrive at consensus to spare that person accountability. But I think that some mixture of those things is probably the answer. I think you're probably going to end up in a situation where either you can't reach consensus because the person you're trying to spare has committed violence against, or there are too many people within the decision-making process that would be harmed by the precedent of that decision. Or you create a formalized system wherein there are councils that represent oppressed minorities or even oppressed majorities, doesn't really matter. just oppressed people in a general sense, marginalized identities that can intervene on those decisions. I think those are the two big answers to that question, and some combination of those answers will probably be the solution. But yeah, the rest of this, of course, is repeating the things that I've said in previous comments. This person says, this is Aiden Jones, 1802. This video was so based. It's a breath of fresh air from all the anarchists who spend their time offering nothing and only calling other anarchists not real anarchists. So as we get towards the end of this video, I will be coming up against, of course, some of those people. I've included comments from the very people they're discussing right there. And the context to that is that when there was a time when I was making criticisms of individualist anarchism, and a bunch of individualist anarchists went and quote mined the video and snipped little chunks of this video in order to try to cast me as some sort of authoritarian, and that all of social anarchism was just an attempt to create a new communist, authoritarian state and all of this. We'll get to those people towards the end, but yeah, this is the reason why it's very, very hard to produce these visions of a future society, because the naysayers are used to not having to provide anything of any substance, but they just get to spend all their time criticizing other people. And so, yeah, I appreciate that a lot of people watch this video and we're kind of refreshed to hear the alternative to that. This one is from One Giant Guy. They say, this was a great in-depth explanation. Personally, I would be uncomfortable with groups higher up, quote unquote, having sovereignty over the groups and individuals that they are composed of. Such larger groups should exist purely through free association and be used only to facilitate cooperation. So this one was included because this person has misunderstood what is in this video. So for those of you that haven't seen the video, this explanation probably is going to be a little meandering, but for those of you that have, hopefully this clarification might be somewhat useful. And so in the video, essentially what I present is that you have varying scales of democratic bodies, you might call them, bodies wherein deliberative decisions are made. And those various scales are kind of nested in one another. Now, some people have watched the video and they've taken away the conception that each of those bodies are staffed by different people, you might say, right? So as you go up to bigger and bigger scales, you elect representatives. And these representatives make decisions for the people at the lower scales. But this is a complete misunderstanding of what's said in the video. And I might also offer that the video is pretty clear about that that's not what's happening. Instead, what's happening is that the decisions of the bottom level are just being combined into larger and larger bodies. So that is to say, for example, let's imagine we have I don't know, I don't remember the exact numbers, terrible memory in that sense, but you've got let's imagine 6 communities in a municipality, right? The municipality is not a separate body making decisions from the community councils. The municipality is a representation of the combined decisions of the community councils. That is to say, you're looking now at the consensus of the community councils. So if you need to get 90%, you need 90% of that, which is to say, because it's only the number 6, you're looking at all of them. All the councils have to have agreed to have passed the measure for it to also then pass at the level of the municipality. And then it will apply to all of them at the level of the municipality. It's not to say there's some separate council called the municipal council that meets apart from all of the community councils and makes decisions that then bear on those at smaller levels. That's not the case at all. It's instead that that the municipal council might just be understood as the combined decisions of all of the community councils. And those regional councils are then the combined decisions of all of the municipal councils, okay? So that's all that's happening here. We're still making decisions at the very bottom. We're just talking about now agglomerating those decisions into larger and larger regions, wherein we need more and more of the councils within those regions to be agreeing to the decisions so that they will now bear on larger and larger numbers of councils. And this is a really super important point to make. This is the kind of point that, excuse me, in a historic sense, if people misunderstood it, they would essentially be recreating a representative system, which is absolutely 100% not what is being advocated in this video. So I think part of the reason why people, and we might get to some more comments where this misunderstanding is occurring, is because I talk about the concept of delegates. Okay, well, the concept of delegates, there's kind of two reasons why you might have a delegate, okay? Number one, you just need somebody to carry out some administrative task. All of you come together and you agree Joe can do the administrative task. And if Joe doesn't do the task as we please, we can revoke Joe's ability to carry that out. Okay. And that's one form of delegation. I don't know what you might call that. Probably you could maybe call it like functional delegation or something. Okay. Then you've got something that is more like a spokes council. Let's say that the municipality, what it wants to do in order to make decisions is it instead wants to have each of the councils by themselves make a decision, then they elect a delegate to represent their decision, to argue for their decision, and they might have a formal meeting of all of those delegates. Here's the thing, the difference between these delegates as described here and the representatives is that the delegates must simply vote as the councils they were delegated by have decided. They don't have like freedom of making new decisions like a representative does when you elect somebody to Congress. So that is a distinct difference. They are essentially just a way to represent the already made decisions of the smaller councils, okay? They're not being given decision-making authority. They're essentially just voicing the things that were already decided. So, okay. That's my response to that comment. Well, let's move on. I don't know how to... or Phoebe Artemis 5367 says, out of curiosity, where do you plan to find the time and energy in individuals to carry out that voting process? This may sound kind of oppositional, but I think this is an extremely reasonable question to ask. So, and I think I kind of lay this out in the response to them. I think this is one of the ones I responded to. Number one, it's difficult for us to imagine a society where we participate in the decisions that are being made about that society because we live in a society where we are so crushed by the amount of labor that we have to do in order to keep this unreasonable structuring of society continuing. We're exhausted. We're emotionally and physically exhausted because we live in a society that subjugates us. Okay. And number one, first point, that's the first point I would make. In the society being described, we would have a society where there's much less subjugation and where people would probably have quite a bit more free time to participate in these sorts of activities. But another thing I think I present there is that there's another way to approach this, and that is maybe you just have one day out of the week where everybody attends the councils. And they spend one day out of every week making decisions together. Everybody comes together in their councils face to face and they make decisions. Or you do 2 days a week. Another way, of course, is to have have decisions integrated into your daily life, right? If people are working, as we have discussed in after the revolution, there would be workplace councils. And in those workplace councils, you might be making decisions, pertinent decisions about how things would be structured. And so I guess what I'm trying to get across is in a society where the people control the world they live in, they can integrate the decision-making process into their lives in a variety of different ways. You know, we have this tendency, of course, to think about decision-making and a democratic process as being something that can only be constituted by a bunch of people getting into a room and talking with one another. And I do advocate that to some degree. We do want to have a face-to-face democracy. But I also want to emphasize that we live in the digital era, right? Like, we live in the era where we have vast networks wherein we can make decisions together. You know, we are not limited to only being able to meet in a room together like Congress does and make decisions. We can make these decisions in a decentral fashion. So I guess what that goes on to say is that some decisions you may want everybody to come together and deliberate and face-to-face meet. And some decisions might be more mundane, such that you can send out some big popular digital referendum and everybody receives a message on their cell phone or whatever. And then they just like talk about the referendum together digitally and make a decision digitally. You could bifurcate that out. You could make distinctions between which decisions get made in which ways. You know, there's a lot of answers to the question. And I think one of the things, this isn't aimed at the person here, but one of the things that frustrates me when people talk about and think about future systems is how they seem to think that we only have the tools on hand, or that we have to do things basically the way this system does them, and we're going to need to just reorganize that in some sense. And what I would like to suggest is that the system is not doing things the most efficient way that it could. And that if we created a truly horizontal society, it may very well be that we could create completely new solutions. We could utilize the tools that are available to us in radically different ways, because horizontality functions in such a radically different way than hierarchical power that many of the tools that hierarchical power is currently using may be completely obsolete in a horizontal society. So this is one thing that I would mention here. You know, those are some of the responses that I would have to that in a general sense. The guy stealing your internet says, here's my problem with the whole fixed communities based on Dunbar's number thing I've seen in many proposed anarchist societies. What if they have kids? Is it ridiculous to think that someone who has lived in a community their whole lives would want to stay there? If so, does that mean a different person must leave? What if they also want to stay there? I've never heard these questions answered in these videos. I'd just like to say off the bat, and this is something that's important, I've kind of abandoned the concept that these communities should only be based on Dunbar's number. And I said that in a previous, I think in the last live stream. I think that actually is probably not a great idea. You know, my impression for why that I chose Dunbar's number is because that is our loose scientific consensus on what we think the sort of like maximum number of people is that will allow you to maintain real like social connections. And that number is 150. And that's about the number of people that scientists conceive cognitively your brain can handle as being real human connections. Now, I'm not going to go into the fact that that's extremely back of the envelope and that's not very specific and it's based on really loose cognitive science, but it is relatively close to my experience as well. The number appears to be about 120 to 150 or something, and that seems to be about the maximum number of real connections one can have. But I've changed my mind about that being sort of like the max for every council. I don't think that is probably a good idea for a variety of reasons. Number one, I don't like the idea, but this person gives one example of why that's a bad idea. Right? Like, well, okay, so your kids, if you have a kid, now your kid's in some new council, because the way I proposed it was, you don't need to like move somewhere else. It's just that there would be a lot of these quote unquote community councils overlapping within any regionality. So, you know, like you have a kid, answering their question by the way that I conceived it and after the revolution, the answer would be, oh, you have a kid. They would be populated into a new council, which is now being populated by the next generation of people. You know, oh, okay, your council hit the max of 150. We're now populating a new council of people. You know, it's at 23, 24, 25 5 people as it proceeds and more people populate into society. We fill out and we populate new councils in that process. And these councils coexist side by side with all the other councils. You don't need to move anywhere. These are not geographically oriented councils. These are more, they were maximally created for that number to be conserved. I now think this is the wrong way to go. I think that free association is more valuable than maintaining that number. And if people feel as if they would rather associate with one or another council of any number, they should be allowed to do so. Part of the reason, I should say, there was another motivation as to me creating the strict number, and that is because if you do the math, what you're going to find is it's actually really dangerous to have the same, essentially like at the same scale, that decision-making body being comprised of more or less people. Let's imagine that every community has roughly the same amount of voting power at the municipal level. And one community only has 5 people in it, and another community has 1,000 people in it. Now what you're basically saying is the two communities have roughly the same voting power. And that was what I was trying to avoid by standardizing the number. I wanted to make it to where you couldn't have this sort of like vote hacking, and where you couldn't just arbitrarily create some new community that's a very few number of people, and those few people now have more power as per their numbers. And of course, this is motivated by the fact that you can see this happening in the American voting system, right? Where, we have 2 different systems. One is, the representative system, and one is the Senate system. One, doesn't matter how many people are in your state, you just get 2 senators. And the other one, the number of representatives you have scales with the number of people in the state. But what we've seen is that actually kind of has some flaws for exactly the reason I just stated. You have essentially an entire body of government where somehow people with, a tenth the number a tenth the number of citizens are essentially have the same voting power by representation as the larger place, right? So we see California has an enormous number of people in it, yet somehow Ohio in the Senate has the same voting power as California. And so this is something I was hoping to avoid by using Dunbar's number. But I think ultimately you could probably solve that instead by simply just using the raw numbers of everybody that was in those councils at the next scale. You don't determine it just based on the councils, or there's 2 layers. It has to have this number of people raw period across the scale. And on top of that, you also need some amount of consensus within the number of councils at that scale. So I don't know, we're really getting into the weeds with this one, but I think that this was like a valid discussion to have. And I hope you followed me through that. I hope that I didn't kind of ramble wildly there. User HB30X, okay, it's just a string of letters, numbers, says, I would like to know how an anarchist society would work under the abolition of money and what Kropotkin called a local decentralized planned economy, because I personally agree with Kropotkin. This video, as I've said, does not answer that question, of course, which is how do you do decentral planning? There are a variety of possible answers to the question. One is to create essentially just a list of needs and a list of haves, and to use a very large computer system in order to coordinate the needs with the haves. You'll hear arguments that this is not possible within Hayekian economics, or is it Friedman? I don't recall. But the idea that that there's a problem with coordinating resources without a market, I think that's probably very outdated. I think that our computers could probably handle that. However, I did not lay that out in this video. That was not the answer. That was not the question this video was meant to answer. Okay, we got another long comment here. This one is from DWO Boyle Music. They say, what I like about this video is that it is hopeful. What I was thinking about over the last few days, though, is two things that I need to do more reading on. One, raising kids in a world that doesn't have hierarchies seems especially challenging because, well, we were all kids once. Kids can be difficult. As someone who is very anti-trust authority and adults by default, as a child, I gotta wonder how different I would have reacted were the world structured more like this. Eventually, my distrust for authority led me to leftist circles and philosophy. But if that philosophy was the status quo, I wonder. I could very easily see any sort of "you have to wait until society says you're an adult" could be seen as philosophically dissonant. Unfortunately, I think the solution is just focus on education and trying to do the best by the people on an individual basis. 2. Most people seem to just want to get on with their lives without ever being super involved in the world or community, which is fine and healthy in some ways, but ends up resulting in people who want to be involved more, for sometimes questionable reasons, ending up in leadership-like positions anyway. Is there any way that people have discussed to counteract this phenomena? So, on the first one, they're essentially just talking about youth liberation, right? And they're talking about how, we have this common conversation about, is the relationship between the adult and the child a hierarchical one? What I argue is that it's not. It's actually a relationship of specialization or expertise. What the adult brings to the table is an expertise about life, aka what we would just call wisdom, right? They know what is harmful, what is dangerous, what is good. How should children focus their minds upon the tasks at hand? And they therefore act sometimes as a way to protect children. I think one of the confusions here is just the simple fact that children never really got to make a decision. They never got to delegate their parents, right? It's expertise without delegation. And so it makes us question, does all expertise have to be delegated, or, should all people within positions of specialization be delegated? My answer is still yes. Everywhere that can be done, it must be done. But in the occasion of the parents, it's essentially delegation by natural fact. There's just no way around the fact that, if you're a parent, you now have a sort of responsibility to be a ward to your children, but also to educate them, to provide a source of wisdom. However, what I think the key point to really point out here is that the child is not just some subject to the parent that should have to listen to the parent at all times. I mean, obviously, given that we've just discussed that the parent has wisdom, they have expertise, more expertise than the child about life. Obviously, the child should listen to the parent when it comes to important things. But I think we're all familiar with the fact that youth often has a kind of wisdom. And that wisdom arises from the fact that youth has not been indoctrinated. Youth has not had their minds altered by the opinions of society. They see things with fresh eyes. And often, because they see things with fresh eyes, they are able to recognize where there are mistaken concepts, where people haven't thought through a particular issue. Sometimes their naive questions are absolutely eviscerating of an adult's ideological conceptions. And so, what I guess I'm trying to emphasize here is that the adult and the child both have strengths that are complementary to one another. The adult has wisdom and the child has novelty, essentially, right? The child sees things anew and is able to question them, and the adult sees things as they've experienced them and is able to dispense wisdom. Both of those have a complementary value in producing a good society. And the child should not simply be seen as an inferior in that relationship. The child should be expected to listen to expertise where it exists, but the child, especially as they grow older, should also be given the understanding that they have autonomy, that they have dignity, that they deserve to be able to say when they don't like something. In fact, I would argue that that is part and parcel to preventing abuse. Okay? Children often know they don't like what's being done to them when they're being abused by adults. And that is either physical or sexual. And they know when it's wrong a lot of the time. And if children were taught, adults don't just have complete authoritative control over you. Sometimes they're wrong and you're right. That would probably, in a general sense, prevent more abuse from taking place in society, would prevent more children from being abused, promoting the dignity of children and young people in a general sense. So I think that would be really the ethos that would be very present in an anarchist society, the ethos of complementarity between the young and the old. The second one is another very valid observation, and that is there is a problem with participation. Those who want to participate more are often those who want more power. Okay, so you'll find that they're more consistently available because they know that they gain power by being more consistently available. And those who do not seek power may be less consistently available, less able to motivate themselves to come about to make the decisions that are necessary to promote their dignity and autonomy and the dignity and autonomy of others. And I agree. One thing I want to emphasize right off the bat, however, is that this is not really unique to this system, right? Like, that's true for literally every single kind of system you could ever conceptualize, especially the system we exist in right now, right? There's no mandatory voting in the vast majority of countries. And even in the places where there is mandatory voting, that still doesn't mean that people are going and have the equal amount of participation, of engagement with this political system that they're part of. And those who do have more participation and more engagement are going to generally be those who have more power, because they're going to spend more time trying to figure out how to get their opinions listened to. I just want to emphasize that that's going to happen in literally every single kind of society, and that it is something you cannot avoid in an anarchist society or a horizontal society or an anarchic society, however you want to say it. You aren't going to avoid that there either. It's still going to be a problem. And it's understandable how, given this fact, some people would advocate, mandatory voting or whatever. I think that would probably be more harm than good. That coercive act would probably do harm to society. But you definitely want to create a society where people are encouraged to take place in these councils as much as conceivably possible. And everybody who is part of this political system should absolutely want to be present in promoting that participation for the very reasons being discussed here. So another way, of course, as we've discussed in just a minute ago, was to try to fully integrate it into their lives, either in their workplace, if they're working, or through some digital means, through some device by which they connect to the rest of society, asking for their votes, promoting their opinion being heard and all of these things. But I do think that even in an anarchist society, you're going to be stuck with some kind of equivalent of a get out the vote campaign. So yeah, actually, these are very good observations. All right, we got another long comment here. Let's see what we got. Valerie Thistlewind. I think this person commented on one of the last ones. They say, overall, this is a splendid video that has very clear images and quite effective ideas and how they would be materially performed. Great content. However, one thing you mentioned caught my ear. You mentioned sex work at an early part of the video, and that caused me concern. To clarify, I do not have any form of bias against sex work, more specifically sex workers. Nonetheless, based on conversations I've held with various sex workers, strippers, escorts, etc., their labor is born from desperation. Just as any member of the working class, they do what is necessary to earn money to survive under capitalism, in their case by performing sexual acts, and for some to the extent of having sex with those they would not do so without this oppressive incentive. With that said, I'm curious what would extend the existence of sex work in an anarchist society. If everyone's needs are met, quality food, crispy water, snazzy houses, free healthcare, etc., why would sex workers perform sex work outside of enjoyment? This is not meant to demean sex work in any capacity, as I hold only respect and admiration for sex workers, but I am somewhat leading to a question. Would this framework of society that you portray in this video maintain profits, or money for that matter? If so, what effect, for better or worse, do you think this would have on said society? If not, how would you theorize sex work acting under such conditions? Sorry for an already too long comment, but I want to add I do understand the time constraints in this video as you mentioned, and if my comments on sex work are demeaning despite my intention to completely avoid doing such disrespect, please do call me out so I can learn from it. Also, congrats again on getting so many subscribers. Okay. So I think there are a few things that I would like to say to this. One is, of course, I would like to re-emphasize, of course, that this is still, what is proposed in this video still does have a market. Right? It's not fully decommodified. So we're not dealing with an anarcho-communist society and then discussing how sex work would persist in an anarcho-communist society. Here we're talking about a society wherein people are still working for a wage, in which case the sex work is just another form of work, right? The question I would offer in response is, well, why would it cease when almost all other forms of labor persist, right? Like all other forms of labor, or most other forms of labor, are probably going to be taking place in the wage relation, and there will probably still be some profit incentive for these enterprises. And so, yes, sex work in the capacity that we recognize it now would continue in that sense. However, people would not be deprived of the basic amenities of life in the description in After the Revolution. In After the Revolution, what I describe is that the basic amenities of life, that is to say food, water, housing, etc., are covered. Those things are just distributed directly, right? And therefore, the only people who would go into sex work in that occasion are people who would want the wage associated with it and would find that work to be preferable to other forms of work, in which case, of course, it's just another form of work. And in my mind, it absolutely is. Sex work really has literally no discerning features from any other form of work. Everybody is selling their body. Sex workers are simply selling their body in a particular way, which is in no way more or less demeaning than those who, are work for delivering boxes as delivery drivers, or, working on an oil rig or whatever it is. It's just another form of labor. I don't think that you've been demeaning here, but I think that's what I would emphasize, right? Sex work's not going to be decommodified in the description here, because, that's not this basic demand such as food, water, housing, etc. Now, in an anarcho-communist society, that's a much more complicated question. I think that's a way harder thing to answer. And the answer is only that the sex workers, insofar as we would even continue to call them sex workers, would continue doing it only because they are, in their mind, providing a service to society. And that would be something that they would only do, of course, if they wanted to, because there is no financial incentive for them to do so, and everything is provided directly distributed to them. And therefore, if you had sex work, anything that would be approaching sex work in an anarcho-communist society, it would only be because those people were doing so because they saw it as a sort of social service. They saw it as a service to society. Otherwise, we might just say that they're just being very promiscuous, of course, right? They just like sleeping around, in which case I think we would really cease to call it sex work. Interestingly, this was a topic of angry conversation on Twitter. Of course, they turned it into a massive shit show where everybody was so angry at each other that they were screaming mad and everybody was blocking each other over the attempt to even have a discussion about this topic. But that's kind of some of the basic things that I would describe here. Next one is from, what was I say? Funk Bungus. That's right. Funk Bungus. Modified consensus as described by David Graeber is almost analogous to what you lay down here. And I only bring this up because I feel like this is an often unspoken but widely felt critique within our movement on the idea of consensus certain anarchists imply is necessary and then use as a gatekeeping device to some extent. Dogmatic anarchists blow my mind. If you violently disagree with a resolution, it shouldn't be dismissed, but if you're just a contrarian, there needs to be checks and balances to mitigate your corrupting of the process. Yes. So one thing that should be said here, I think the reason I included this is mostly that very last part. My intention with creating the modified consensus process and after the revolution was that you have to understand that you will never create a society so perfect that there will never be people who are motivated by negative interests and don't just want to sow discord and try to be contrarians and just like disagreeing with other people. And insofar as those people exist, they're going to make consensus very, very difficult, especially when we talk about scaling consensus up to hundreds of thousands or millions of people, as is described in After the Revolution. People are always going to exist. And you want to prevent a system wherein those people are able to just stop the whole process from taking place. Okay, that just all by themselves, one person just gets to stop the process being carried out by 99.99999% of the population just because they want to, they enjoy it, it gives them pleasure. Because unfortunately, much as you might like to believe that those people aren't going to exist in a future society because everything's going to be, rainbows and kittens and flowers, they're going to exist in any society because that's just part of human nature, is that you will always have diversity of different viewpoints, ideas, and approaches. You're always going to birth people with differing inclinations and understandings of the world, including those kinds of people that we would all probably be infuriated with, those sorts of contrarians. And this is part of what led Bookchin away from consensus, it should be said. Bookchin began to advocate majoritarianism precisely because Bookchin didn't want the tyranny of the minority, of that contrarian minority over the majority when the majority wanted to make a decision together. My solution is not to abandon consensus entirely, but to use a form of modified consensus, which has fallbacks where you have to go through a process of attempting to gain 100% consensus first, and then only after you have failed to gain 100% consensus can you have fallbacks to lesser forms of consensus. So yeah, that's part of the reason. That's what motivated my reasoning as to the modified consensus process and After the Revolution. Okay, so this is another long comment. This person says, or Mr. Hamsterism says, I love this. I have two issues with it, despite loving the model overall. One, the citizen or community militia could potentially decide to use their power internally to achieve their own mandates. In effect, they could wield minority power just through threat of violence without needing a full military takeover. The only defense this model would provide against it is other community militias. This would lead to civil war at the large scale if a number of these militias decided that their minority was not being heard, and at the small scale would lead to violent shows of force akin to revolts. Perhaps an elected, temporary, mandate-based governor of local militias could arise, in combination with limiting the power of these militias constantly. 2. What happens if a community refuses to follow the mandate of a larger structure? Forcing them seems like authoritarian majority rule democracy, but allowing them to ignore any mandates from a larger structure is likewise a failure of the mode. Perhaps the community or smaller structure has social benefits taken away if they do not align with the larger structure, a form of violent threat that isn't physically violent. So this one's been included because these are more really great comments, really good insight here, okay? So number one, I just want to say, as for number one, I agree that the fact that all of these citizen militias are essentially controlled by their communities, and that the power of violence kind of overwrites all other kinds of forms of formal and informal decision making. That, of course, you could have communities where their citizen militias, essentially disagree with the community mandate or disagree with other community mandates, in which case, of course, you could have some violent conflict. But one thing I always try to emphasize to people is, theoretically, that's possible of literally every single kind of society. There is no society where violence is not essentially always going to be a failure point, and the ability to wield violence will not always be a failure point. You cannot create a society wherein, if there are those who want to carry out violence, they cannot then pressure other bodies through threat of violence or use of violence to do things that they want them to do, or to go rogue from the structures which are supposed to govern them, and create civil conflict or shows of force. In fact, that's happened in many different hierarchical societies, right? Like that's what leads to military coup. That's unfortunately, not that uncommon. It even goes back into feudalism and so on. If kings did not have strong control over their militaries, sometimes the militaries would revolt and they would oust the previous king and put a new king in power. And part of what protected kings from being overthrown was precisely that the military had to agree with them and had to follow them and demonstrate loyalty and so on. So I don't think that's like particularly unique to the anarchist structure that's being offered here. But I do want to say that I think a big factor I would emphasize is that the militias are the people. Unlike in hierarchical societies where those in militias or the army or whatever are doing specialized tasks that are beyond or outside of the tasks of the rest of society, they're not also the decision makers. They're not also the citizenry. In fact, they consider themselves usually apart from the citizenry. Here they are the citizenry. The citizen militias are the people. They're staffed of the people, right? I'm not saying that negates the concern you've brought up here. Obviously, that's going to be a concern in any society. But I would say it's actually less of a concern in this society, because the militias, everybody that's in the militias was also in the councils that made the decision they're supposedly disagreeing with. Okay. So I guess that's kind of my answer to the first one. Is that, yeah, it's a problem in every society, yet we don't see the army going rogue when they disagree with decisions by the government in most examples, right? Because the army is generally seen as a subservient apparatus to the structure of society. And here, of course, the militias would see themselves as servants to the general will of society as well, right? So I'm very doubtful that would lead to any extra problems here. In fact, I think it would probably lead to less because, of course, once again, the militias are the councils. What are they so upset about? They were part of the councils that made the decisions. The second one is one that kind of comes up in a later comment as well. I think this idea, what if somebody refuses to do what the quote unquote larger structures have agreed to? Well, as I kind of said in a previous one, there's no quote unquote larger structure above and beyond the structure that is taking place at the lowest level. The larger structures we've discussed are only the agglomerations of decisions of the smaller structures. So something that's often said, and I think this is a pretty good point in a general sense, is if your councils took place in all of the decisions to begin with, then you already agreed to do the things. Nobody's forcing you to do something you don't want to do. You literally, the thing you've all agreed to do, you were part of the decision-making process to do the thing. You made the decision together with everyone else. You arrived at this extremely high degree of consensus, as has been described here. You're not having anyone make a decision above and beyond you. You made the decision. So then the only thing we're really dealing with is either you're in that like 10% minority or something, or you just don't follow through on what you've said you're going to do. Well, so how does enforcement take place? That's what's going to be asked in a later comment. So we may go short when that comes up in the later comment. But what I would emphasize is that in our society, enforcement is extremely codified and punitive. Whereas in an anarchist society, the word enforcement would kind of be hard to use because there would be so many gradations of things that might possibly happen. Let's say, for example, you agreed to distribute some amount of your surplus to this commune on the 5th of every month, and then you cease to do so. Well, then we would need to inspect, why did you cease to do so? Did you cease to do so because of some act of malice, which is to say you're just trying to screw over that commune? Well, then why did you agree to it to begin with? And then we would need to go back and we'd need to talk through the consensus process. You already agreed to do it, so on and so on. So then what might happen? You might need some mediator or intermediary to talk things through to resolve any possible conflicts. That's maybe layer number one, right? Some form of mediation. After that, you might say, okay, well, you also are given the surplus of a variety of different bodies, including the surpluses of the body you've refused to distribute materials to. And, maybe we all just agree to not have that commune that you won't give materials to won't give you materials in return, and you'll be deprived of those materials in return. That may be enough. It may be enough to simply have social sanctions. Everybody's just angry at you. It doesn't want to involve themselves with you. They're not bringing, they don't want to bring you into particular decisions that are being made, which is to say that might lead to defederation. It may lead to people freely disassociating with you. But I would say that's probably a pretty extreme measure, right? That's something that would only happen after a long process of attempting mediation, discussion, dispute resolution, and so on, because being defederated would be rough, right? That's a pretty big punishment. That's almost the ultimate punishment, to be honest, right? Like there's only one thing worse than being defederated, and that's entering violent conflict. So that would be one possible threat where they say, okay, well, we just don't want to associate with you, go find a federation that wants to associate with you because you've demonstrated that you won't follow our communal agreements. You agreed to this and you're refusing to follow it. So we don't really trust you to be part of our further decision-making processes, and we would like to freely disassociate, which would be pretty devastating. I mean, that essentially amounts to economic sanctions. But it is within the spirit of free association within anarchist principles. So that's a pretty extreme punishment if it comes to that. And then, of course, lastly, let's imagine, you're not just refusing to follow communal decisions, but you are like subjugating people. Let's imagine trying to reintroduce wage labor or reintroduce, capitalist property relations, reintroduce slavery and things like that. Then, yeah, there may be call for military conflict. It would be absolutely reasonable and justifiable for people to defend themselves from your incursion upon the commonly agreed to, dignity and autonomy of human beings. You're trying to bring back slavery. You're trying to bring back capitalism. Those are threats to everyone else, and they would be justified in defending themselves from you. But notice that there's sort of like an escalation of severity here. We don't just have one law on the books about what to do. We have a bunch of possible solutions. And I suspect we would escalate through those possible solutions as the party in question refused to revise their actions or to enter into some new deliberative process wherein we make decisions together. So next comment is from Jay, and they say, how would you suggest organizing militias in response to a larger threat? As far as I'm aware, most militaries are very hierarchical with a strong chain of command. Would the Confederacy want to elect generals tasked with directing militias in times of warfare, or would such a system be too vulnerable to abuse? I would say there's a lot of nuance to this question. Number one, yes, most militaries are very hierarchical, but I would consider that a weakness in a general sense. It actually may be quite beneficial to have a decentralization and use of being able to use cells and militia tactics by default. And anarchism is powerful insofar as that it kind of allows us to flex into a bunch of different structures without becoming too rigid. So if we want there to be generals, if we want there to be unit commanders and so on, we can delegate those tasks and we can revoke them at a whim. So if we want to create that structure, we can, but it's not rigid. It can be gotten rid of if the soldiers, which is say the people that are in the militias, are displeased with the way that some delegated person within the structure is behaving. So that's my answer to the question, is that anarchism is incredibly flexible. That is to say, it could delegate people to do those traditional tasks if they were found to be necessary. And if they were not found to be necessary, may in fact, given the results of modern warfare, it may actually be more effective for them to be highly decentralized. Because in fact, what we seem to see in the modern world is that really big hierarchical militaries are foiled by decentral guerrilla militaries. So yeah, kind of complicated, but that's my answer to that question. Whistle Fantasy says, 1, doesn't your proposed system place the highest workload on the smallest unit, the individual? And 2, how would a majority deal with a scenario in which a minority is automatically against most proposals, but they're big enough to stop all decisions? So number 2, I pretty much just answered, so I won't repeat myself. Number 1 is, I had a hard time kind of understanding what's being said here, because doesn't your proposed system place the highest workload on the smallest unit? Kind of, but that's almost part of the value here, is that the individual has power within this system. They're not disempowered. That's sort of the point of the system, right? And if they find that that workload is too big, then they can use delegation. This is something I keep emphasizing. The strength of anarchism is its flexibility, its capacity to delegate or not delegate as it pleases, right? Oh, if it delegates somebody, it doesn't like how they're doing, they can just revoke the delegation. It is very different from how these rigidly structured, representative, hierarchical systems function. So if the individuals find they can't handle the workload at the ground level, then they can delegate people to those tasks. But it is very, very important that all of that power is able to devolve back down to the base level. So I don't really see number 1 as weakness. I actually think that it is the strength of this model. As I said, number 2 is pretty well already been answered. We talked about how would a majority deal with a scenario in which a minority automatically acts against most proposals. The next one is, what's that say? Tor Wickstrom. Hello, I really like your videos and have been watching them for some time, but I picked up on something that I think is a bit concerning in the video. At 22:17, you speak of how wrongdoers have to be separated and forced to undergo rehabilitation in specialized rehabilitation communities. This does look awfully a lot like a state structure, in my opinion, and I was hoping you could re-examine that snippet of the video. Thanks in advance. So yeah, this brings us to a topic. I mean, this is pretty well, like, this particular part is what a bunch of kind of bad faith actors pointed to as being the reason why what I was proposing was an authoritarian state structure and so on. We'll get to some of those comments a little bit later. But one thing I want to point out is that when it comes to people who are harming the rest of society, you pretty much only have 3 options, and I guess you might say 4, but the 4th option is pretty much useless. The options are: you keep them from the rest of society somehow, which is to say you isolate them, okay? You kill them, or you exile them. That is to say you kick them out. And number 4 is you do absolutely nothing. Those are solutions for people that do egregious harm to others and are not responsive to therapeutic services. Obviously, step number 1 is therapy and rehabilitation outside of any of these structures. Okay. What I propose in the video is isolation and rehabilitation. You know, I mean, the sorts of people I'm talking about in the video that go into these rehabilitation communities are like serial killers and serial rapists and so on, right? I'm not talking about, you know, people who just like took a loaf of bread from someone or got into a fight in a bar or something, right? We're talking about people who are a malignant presence in society and have consistently shown themselves to be as such. Those people, you either keep them away from society for long enough to try to rehabilitate them, which is what I suggest, which is what I call these rehabilitation communities. You murder them, which I don't suggest. I don't support the anarcho death penalty, which I think is honestly quite a bit more barbaric and unfortunately is prone to mistakes. And then we just murdered people on accident. Exile is not really possible. In fact, we don't live in a society where exile can be done anymore, because anywhere you would exile somebody to, it's not just a wilderness. There are other people that are there. Therefore, what you're doing is you're essentially letting them loose into a new victim pool, which I consider to be an act of assault or being an act of aggression on other communities. You know, if you refuse to deal with the problem that is present in your community and you just kick them out so that they can go screw up some other community, yeah, that's kind of on you. You already know that there's a problem with this person. You haven't done anything to fix the problem, and you just let them go victimize other human beings. And you know, it might sound nice where you just say, okay, well, we just tell everybody that they're a victimizer. Okay, so where do they go in this situation, right? There's nowhere to exile people to other than wilderness. And honestly, as time is moving on, we're seeing less and less of that wilderness. And even then, you're essentially putting abusers and serial killers and so on out into a place where they have absolutely no accountability, and you're kind of just creating this violent, brigand territory outside of all of your centers, which basically just turns people in rural areas into victim pools. It's not feasible. That's not feasible. Exile does not exist, cannot be the answer to the question. Systematized murder cannot be the answer to the question. And doing nothing, I think we can all agree, is just absolutely unacceptable. Doing nothing is assisting this person in killing, abusing, manipulating more people. And if society does literally nothing, I would say that society is complicit in the continuation of this person doing damage. So that pretty much just leaves some form of isolation and rehabilitation. If you want to call that a prison, I disagree with you. But if you think that's a prison, you think that prisons are inevitable, unless you once again want to murder anybody that you think is a problem, or you want to outsource abuse onto other people, and you want to not have to deal with the problems of the abuser and let them abuse someone else. That's pretty much your only option. Your only option is to find some way to give this person an environment where they can't harm other people, or they're surrounded by only other people who would harm someone else. And in the video, the rehabilitation communities are not like a prison insofar as you are not stripped of all your rights. You're just only stripped of the right of leaving that community. That's it. That's just it. You still are functioning in workplace councils and community councils, and those councils are still associated with the rest of the federation. Like, I just don't know what the other option is, unfortunately. And insofar as that's the case, anybody who's really not engaging with the topic in the sense that I just discussed is really not engaging with the topic. And this is kind of what happens when you don't try to actually figure out what the answers to the problems are. You just say, we'll figure it out when it happens. This is not part of the video that I have considered to be incorrect. I think that what I said here still remains the best solution. That you still need to have community, that you essentially just need to have these communities where people who have demonstrated that they are incapable of not harming others are still able to be given a dignified life. They're still able to do work that makes them feel fulfilled, that they are still able to take place in the broader democratic decisions of society and so on, but wherein they are not around a victim pool, wherein they are separated from a victim pool. I think that's the only solution to many of these examples. And insofar as that they have demonstrated that they can be rehabilitated, that they are not going to harm others, then they should be let out of these rehabilitation communities. I don't know what other solution there is. Feel free to brainstorm in the comments, because I don't see others any possible answer to the question but one of the four that I've described. So Comrade Freedom says, my main issue is the idea of suicide being an acceptable thing. Euthanasia is fine because if a person is no longer capable of enjoying life, then that's a just reason for ending it. Suicide due to the stress of life-changing events or various mental disorders is just kind of cruel to the people who care about the person attempting suicide. Just my opinion. Apart from that, this society sounds pretty ideal to me. I think that it should happen in these three countries before any others: the US, China, and Russia, because they are the world's major superpowers. Yeah, I mean, this one I could see how people would have all kinds of different opinions on it. I'm open to having my opinions changed, but my conception is that suicide is a human right. You didn't get to choose that you were brought into this world. And if your existence is so miserable that there seems to be no solution, then it's understandable that you would not want to experience life anymore. That being said, obviously, I think there are a variety of sort of mitigating circumstances. Okay. One is that, of course, people with mental illnesses often have big swings of mood. Where perhaps, 70% of the time they're fine, and then 30% of the time they're in a terrible depressive state wherein they wish they weren't alive. I think we can all agree that would be a really unfortunate situation for that person to kill themselves. That would be, a terrible tragedy, especially for those who are around them. And we might say also for the person who killed themselves, because 70% of the time their life was pretty acceptable and they didn't get to go on to experience more of their life, wherein 70% of that would have been pretty good. I should emphasize here that, they try to delineate euthanasia from suicide, but euthanasia is not different from suicide. Euthanasia is a kind of suicide. And it's being carried out for the reason that suicide would generally be carried out, which is the person's life is so miserable in one way or another, they don't want to continue living. I, valuing the autonomy of human beings, believe that they have the right to do so if their life, they deem that their life is too miserable to continue living. I think the mistake, that usually takes place when people are committing suicide, that we are all sort of lamenting, is that life is not this constant, that people are often go through very, very deep lows that they think will last forever. And they make this extremely permanent decision to kill themselves. Whereas it's quite possible that things will not stay that way forever. and that one day their life will improve. And it seems impossible for them to imagine when they're in that very low depressive state. And they end it, and they disallow themselves the capability to perhaps one day experience a better life, a life that doesn't have those features anymore. And so I understand the feeling that it is tragic, and also the feeling that, of course, it does horrible damage to the people around them. And I would say to anybody who is listening to this right now, if you're feeling suicidal, what I would emphasize is those two things. Number one, there are probably people around you who care, and who you might think don't, right? You might think there aren't. But what I've seen is when a person kills themselves, there is always a community of people who cared, who they thought didn't care, and who are devastated, deeply devastated. I know people to this day who are still emotionally devastated from the suicide of a person that was either close to them or not even that close to them. And so consider the damage that it does to others, as the commenter says here. But also, number two, life just has ups and downs, and it's very difficult when you are in the down to see that things may swing back the other way for a period of time. But when they swing back the other way, you can see the value in living. And that's why you shouldn't do it, because you can't see the future. You don't know what the future holds. Moreover, might I add, we all kind of have responsibility to others to do things which might change the world, to give our lives meaning, and to fulfill the sort of conditions which might bring about our dignity and which might bring about the dignity of others. And it's worthy to continue living to help others. Even if you feel very depressed, even if you feel that there's nothing left, it's still worthy to continue struggling to help people. And that if you struggled until the last day of your life, that would be worthy. So I totally understand where this commenter is coming from. And I agree that suicide is a tragedy. I just, I hold that an anarchist society would not prevent people from doing so if they wanted to do so, because that would be a violation of their autonomy. Next comment is Flow Fly. I always wanted to ask somebody who proposed that kind of ideas about one particular detail. I don't exactly understand the need for delegates. If delegates supposed to carry only very specific tasks, is it even necessary to choose them in the first place in the age of our communication technologies? So here's the thing. Delegation should not be understood as carrying out the same task as like representation. In a general sense, you're not going to choose delegates to make decisions for you. You're going to choose delegates to carry out particular tasks. Imagine, for example, we want to build a bridge. What we would need is for people who have expertise about how to build a bridge to come together and build the bridge. And delegation would be the process wherein we choose the architects and choose the people who understand what it is to build a bridge, and choose the construction workers and so on, and delegate them to the task. So delegation is basically just temporarily giving the power of the collective to people who are seen as having expertise to carry out a task. Might be seen, delegation is most often used for specialization, which is to say, to allow specialists to carry out the tasks they specialize in. They may also just be carrying out or delivering a message or something. For example, we talked about that in the example earlier of delegates taking the decisions to a sort of spokes council or something. But delegation is a temporary position, giving somebody a temporary position of power, which can be revoked and brought back to the people. So the need for delegation is mostly a practical affair. if it were, if we had a society wherein everybody could do everything, yeah, we wouldn't really need delegation. But delegation basically arises because people have differing specializations, interests, ability to carry out particular tasks and so on. So that's really the answer to that question. So this one is from Owen Belazos. I think they commented on a previous video. They say a commune council would not really be separate from workplace councils, as the commune council is just everyone in the commune who work and have their own workplace council, and the rest of the commune, municipality, region, collective may need to exert pressure against some part of itself if that part has somehow voted itself back into capitalism or cooperative has been voted in too many times and the commune is concerned that they have too much power. Yeah, I mean, that seems like just a decent description of what's going on. It's phrased as if it disagrees with what's in the video, but I don't think it really does. A commune council would not really be separate from the workplace councils. Yeah, that's something I've clarified in a couple other comments, and I'll clarify again. Yes, the bigger councils are just bodies of the previous councils. They are just places wherein the decisions of the previous councils are carried into larger regions, and then consensus is once again determined at the larger regional scale. So the reason I included this, it seems like they may have just misunderstood. This person, Urbane Blobfish, says, so for context, I'm a market socialist, but I'm trying to learn more about anarchism because as I'm studying poli-sci in college, I'm realizing that hierarchy seems pretty not great. I love the video and I was totally on board with you until the voting process. It's way too complicated and I can't even imagine how long it would take for a single bill to be passed, let alone multiple, which is often the case in cases like this. If anything, more bills would need to be passed since anarchism doesn't have a bureaucracy. I know it has a negative connotation, but I'm just using the government definition of it. And so different departments aren't doing stuff on their own alongside bills. By the time any bill gets passed, so much time and energy would have been spent by the people involved, especially since you're trying to include absolutely everyone. It needs to be way more streamlined unless I'm missing something. Great video besides that, though. So I guess the first thing I would say here is I just kind of disagree with the characterization that what I've presented in the video is somehow like a more complicated voting procedure. I think this is what I respond to them, actually. I don't think what I presented in the video is a more complicated voting procedure than you'll find in any other form of democracy. In fact, I think it's relatively less complicated than any other that you'll find. But it sounds complicated because I'm actually describing it from beginning to end with all of the nuances and details. If I were to make you a flow chart of how a representative democracy makes decisions, it would be a nightmarish flowchart. It would be 10 times more complicated than anything that I propose in this video. Every single decision-making process that you could ever conceive, if it is to actually represent the needs of the masses, is going to be relatively complicated because it has to correct for possible shortcomings. So I don't think that this is accurate, but I'm also not understanding necessarily what it's saying when anarchism doesn't have a bureaucracy, and so different departments aren't doing stuff on their own alongside bills. They absolutely are, because you would have delegation, right? Once again, you would delegate people and groups of people to do particular tasks that have been determined by the councils. So that may be where they are misunderstanding and why they think that it's too complicated. We don't need to vote. We don't need to redo consensus every single time that any event takes place. We don't need all of society to agree that I'm allowed to walk down the street, or, who the engineers are for the bridge, every single day, every single time the engineer carries out a task and writes a number on a paper. He doesn't have to get approval to write the number on the paper again. We pass the agreements, and the agreements hold until we say otherwise. And those agreements can be as pretty well as wide spanning as we like, so long as they do not violate the fundamental agreements of the confederations that we are part of. So yeah. Here we have Owen Belizos again. They say, one thing I would think would be a good idea if some more centralized body needed exist, which at least for the few decades might, then instead of democracy use random selection and exclusion of past representatives. In this system, multiple delegates taking off a substantial amount of the commune, approximately 1/4 to 1/10 of the people through random selection. For example, there's 10 communes of 1,000 people, and there's a need for a higher council instead of just a coalition. What would happen is probably a quarter would be randomly selected to serve on this higher council. If someone doesn't want to, someone else would be randomly selected, and then after their term they would be excluded from the next selection, and new people would be selected, and after their term themselves and the people before them would be excluded as well, and this would continue until no more people can be selected, and the cycle would restart until no more communes want the higher council. This strategy means in a 2-level hierarchy, there would be maximum amount of representation possible. Extroverts, charismatic, and or manipulative people wouldn't have any unfair advantage in getting into power either. Also, because of random selection, it would be much harder for power-hungry people to keep and maintain power. Plus, if done on a computer, it would be easy to see tampering by looking at the code. I think random selection is way better to find delegates, as it means introverts and uncharismatic people don't have a disadvantage of being selected. It would also not be impossible to have full conversational democracy at 1 to 2, even 3,000 people, because you could use apps similar in function to Discord and Google, which could open chat rooms for people with certain specific grievances, which could then rotate after a certain amount of time until one side has had the most discussion with the most other side, which could then be using mostly the same system you laid out. Okay. Wow. There was just a lot being said there. So one thing I want to say is I disagree with the idea that you would want there to be centralization. I think that would be disastrous, and that would be completely counter to the system being proposed, and in fact would just lead to the end of this system being proposed. Centralization is a process of self-sabotage. So you don't want to have any centralization in the sense that I think you're discussing here. However, I think your idea of rotation and sortition is fine. Rotation and sortition, for example, are being used by the Zapatistas, and the Rojava also uses it for their militias. So that part is valid. That part is usable. And I understand your desire to avoid charismatic and extroverted people from having control of everything. I think that's also valid, but I disagree with your idea that what we should be trying to do is essentially elect representatives all over again. I don't think that that's a good idea, but maybe I've misunderstood what's happening in this comment. I think there's just a lot of elements being discussed here. I'd have to ask some much more specific details. Yeah, so I don't think it's better to use random selection to find delegates as per what I mean by delegates, like I've described in this video. Delegates, it is necessary that delegates be selected by the councils. That is absolutely imperative. You don't want, to randomly select the people to build a bridge. You want to make sure that the councils can choose people who know how to build a bridge. So then what you mean by delegates is people who have representative power. And no, I would not suggest those people be randomly selected. However, once again, if you're just talking about at the very local council level, where the local councils are embodied through rotation and sortition, then we're talking about the Zapatistas. But if you're talking about some central council where all the decisions are being made, no, I think that's a very, very bad idea. Next comment is from Eagle Boy. How would the overall economy, product production, and collectivized industries function and maintain themselves to ensure that everyone's needs were met without having some centralized data management system. Sorry if this is a basic question. I'm just starting to learn about communism and anarchist economics. So here's the thing. It's okay for technology to have centralized components. It's not okay for us to centralize decision making. That's really the distinction that needs to be understood here. It's about where does power flow from and who gets to make the decisions about how that power is oriented. It's fine if we just have centralized servers. Now, of course, they'll fall victim to particular things that are the weaknesses of all centralized systems, but it's not that having a centralized computer system is itself negative. So next one is, I think that says Heron Hero. Around 1650 to 1733 or so, you mentioned drugs as non-coercive activities that don't involve other people as justification for their legalization and practice. For drugs, though, if someone is addicted to some serious substance, such as heroin or alcohol, won't they inherently be a danger to the people they live with? After all, the origins of prohibition started out of the serious stresses alcohol abuse put upon families and women in particular in danger. Isn't the definition of independent, non-coercive activities, as you've laid out, too broad in this case? Also, can there be a part 2 to this? It was great to hear solutions and brainstorm. So, here's the thing. Obviously, addiction is bad. Okay? Addiction is a harm to the person who's addicted and to the people who are around them most of the time. And we should obviously want to create systems to help rehabilitate people who are addicted to any given drug, especially given that we're talking about legalizing all drugs. However, prohibition is not going to lead to the end of addiction. I think that this sort of falls victim to the conception that you can simply prevent these sorts of personal behaviors by passing laws and prohibitions. What we see, of course, is that during the Prohibition era in the United States, that alcohol usage exploded, that there was an enormous insurgence of alcohol production, and that alcohol production just got very dirty, and alcohol usage got very, very unhealthy. It was essentially controlled by a criminal underworld, and there were enormous problems with people's health involved with this. Not even going into detail, but, for example, in the production of wood alcohol, which destroyed people's brains, literally. So I don't think that prohibition is going to be the solution to the problems that you've discussed here. I think that instead we would want to create addiction services. We'd want to create therapy and rehabilitation services for people that were addicted. I think that's a much better solution than prohibition. So no, I definitely stick by the idea that we would want to legalize all drugs, even those which might be seen as very harmful or dangerous, and then instead work to give addiction services to those people who are who are harming themselves and others by use of those drugs. Sai says, question, who would enforce the democratic decisions? So I kind of answered this in a previous one. I had suspected, because there was some repetition here, I might have answered some questions earlier than they later get discussed again. Yeah, there would be a gradually increasing set of enforcement schemas, depending on the circumstances, depending on how much that they may have harmed other people in the process, but it would be based in self-defense as a general principle. So, yeah. That's pretty much the answer to the question. We have another one here from Casper Johan. He says, on the topic of community militias, how would the gun agreements be made? Should each community elect to have a type and restriction owning guns? Or in more broad terms, the collective vote on a process of getting one of a certain type of personal weapon. As we know, some people, even if they want a gun, aren't able to handle the responsibility because of their psychological issues and such. I expect the heavier weaponry like howitzers and high-tech stuff in general should be kept as part of the agreed-upon terms elected by the municipality by the Confederated Union of the local militias, kept and cared for by trusted professionals and members of the commune. But what is your idea? Also, the investigation of crimes and transgressions committed against the collective's interest should be done by simply establishing a community police where the few workers work alongside their neighbors to ensure everybody's safety and well-being, with a long training and highly trained individuals proposed by the members for lack of a better word, serve the public. All right, so we're kind of running long here, so I won't go as too far into detail. But first of all, I think it's pretty reasonable, the first thing you've said as a solution. You know, we've got weaponry, which we need, of course, to have in order for society to be able to defend itself, not only from external threats, but from internal threats. And yeah, you could have that all stored in an armory. And then the armory, of course, divvies up those arms as per the needs of that collective. And, you know, individuals could be given those arms as they desire. And, you know, you could rescind them if the person is a risk to themselves or others. I do have to say, if you were to do that, you'd probably still get so many people that just were finding access to those things anyway. Okay, you'd probably have so many people that find access to them anyway. I do think that insofar as you're talking about people with mental health issues, obviously we might prefer that people with like serious either suicidal or homicidal tendencies not be given access to firearms. But insofar as they exist in society, people are probably just going to find a way to carry out those suicidal or homicidal tendencies. So I won't like settle on what the answer to this question is. I do think armories are a good answer. But yeah, as for the second part, I think I kind of already talked about that. You would have justice councils, and then you would have militias. And the militias that are meant to defend from external threats would also be the militias that were meant to defend from internal threats. So the people would be the militias. And the people could join the militias, or rather, the people could be active in the militias and get training as they desired. And there would be some promotion of everybody joining and getting some basic training within those militias. So Rojava's solution is to actually sort of have like rotation and sortition of the people that are in their local militia structures that carry out sort of like domestic, that like deal with domestic problems. And that seems to work pretty okay for them. It deals with most of their problems. And I would suggest that something like that could definitely be done. But insofar as we're talking about a police force, I would not want that police force to be, you know, apart from the rest of society. You know, I think that it would be dangerous to have those militias be anything but militias of the people, and you want them to make sure that they overlap with all the council structures and so on. Victoria Luna says, the minorities of communities would be diffuse. Each community would have a minority which would have its voice omitted. This minority would largely be the same one in every community. So, for example, gay and trans people or disabled people. This renders certain minorities in a system where effectively a 2/3 vote holds sway completely voiceless. No? I'm under no illusions that it's not exactly any better in a representative system, but I think it's something that needs tweaking if we are to avoid these problems. Also, in the structuring of community groups, does the region or the collective decide and regulate the size of the group? In areas where the population grows, are new, extremely small community groups created wielding disproportionate voting power? Perhaps groups are fractured or split? And how are people to have a truly free will in which community group they belong to if size is regulated? Both options seem problematic. Also, gerrymandering is a concern in a constituency layout as flexible as this, funneling further power toward the majority, expectedly the dominant racial group and the straight, cisgendered, and able-bodied. Creating a flexible constitution, too, allows the majority to further accumulate and secure power over the other classes. The only solution I can think of is mass and coerced migration of classes into localized communities, which already occurs in the current system, gay districts, Chinatown, etc. But this in itself seems highly unethical. Does anybody know of any solution to this issue? I'd be very glad to hear of one. So I think the vast majority of this was answered in a previous comment. I think these are extremely valid concerns. But I think that actually I answered this very early on in this current video. I think that your solution is, there's a variety of things. Number one, the consensus process always aims towards maximum consensus, and there will always be a process wherein minorities are given a deliberative priority. Okay, so that's in the video. Number two, of course, you create councils of the oppressed, and those councils of the oppressed are able to intervene or even veto decisions that are being made by the other councils. The adaptable constitution, I think, is overall probably a strength, not a weakness. I don't think it really opens us up to any more like huge problems. After all, we would have to get consensus of the entire collective to alter that constitution. So I don't really think that part is too big of an issue. But I do think that insofar as we're talking about free association being a solution, I do think you're right to say that free association being a solution would lead to segregation. And in a general sense, I think that would probably be bad. I think it would be bad for us to get segregation, even if it were self-imposed segregation. But yeah, I think that some of the answers that were given earlier, and of course, free association is part of the answer. For example, if you're living in a highly bigoted community as a racial minority or a sexual minority or a transgendered individual or any of those things, you may be better off just disassociating with that community. But I would say that is the least optimal answer to the question. So not to brush this one off, but I feel like we mostly answered it in one of the earlier comments. This one is from String of Letters and Numbers, MMRJ3VO. I've heard many arguments and questions about the prevention of extreme exclusive communities, even up to your level of municipality. How do you enforce the rights of leaving a municipality if, for instance, a religious majority obliterated the 2 to 4% of LGBT individuals in your voting system? What methods are used to allow people to leave or to join other municipalities? I'm a fan of the methods outlined, but I still need some direct answers about how to prevent a true tyranny of the majority in highly culturally heterogeneous municipalities. Let's say 95% of people approve of a measure to imprison a certain minority. How does the surrounding collective prevent this from happening or from passing? Yeah, so I just want to emphasize that this is a very good example of where actual militant defense is probably justified by all of the surrounding collectives. All of the surrounding collectives seeing that there is like a pogrom being carried out in some other collective that is around them, use the words obliterate. That is an act of out and out violence. That's a desire to recreate fascist or reactionary mentalities, to put in place hierarchical power structures, which is an act of aggression against the rest of society. All of society has already agreed to the basic social contract that these things are unacceptable. And insofar as that they are trying to do those things, they are violating the basic social compact that everybody has already agreed to. And this in particular, you're talking about like a violent process that is, they are well justified defending themselves from that in a militant sense. I would say that, That's pure self-defense by the rest of the Federation. They should absolutely disallow that from taking place. And if I were in that situation, I would not even advise any of the intermediary steps. I would say just go straight to either freely disassociating and economically sanctioning that collective, or even the militantly defending from that collective. That is an enormous threat to the creation of a society of freedom, equality, and solidarity. Next comment is yes, this one's a little rule oriented, but it's a good observation. Symmetry System says, shouldn't the deal breakers enter negotiations first? If it's a deal breaker, it's a more pressing issue than a non-deal breaker and is more important to that individual. Shouldn't that take priority? And then why the abandonment of the 90% criteria? If the idea is to achieve consensus, shouldn't the need for a large degree of consensus persist? Yes, understood completely. And this goes along with what other people's comments are about how we would need to worry about a tyranny of the majority. But it's kind of what I was referring to earlier. And that is to say, we also need to make sure that we're preventing a tyranny of the minority. We want to make sure that we don't allow reactionaries, contrarians, and so on from being able to prevent the process from proceeding forward. So insofar as they're talking about how do you order the deal breakers and the non-deal breakers, probably even a lot of you that watch the video don't know what they're talking about, but there's a structure by which if you don't get full consensus, you sort people who say that the measure is a deal breaker for them and they absolutely would just veto it, and the people that it's a non-deal breaker and they would allow it to continue forward even though they disagree. And what I say is you start with the non-deal breakers, because my idea is you're trying to prevent the contrarians and the reactionaries from gumming up the process. If you start with the deal breakers, the people who are trying to gum up the process get to start the process by making massive concessions or might be able to extract massive concessions, which would be harmful to everyone else. And you still haven't even got around to the non-deal breakers. So the way I decided to order it was with the non-deal breakers coming first. And if you can get the non-deal breakers to agree, and you can get above 90% consensus, then you pass the measure. But I totally understand how, the deal breakers are not always going to be reactionaries and conservatives and so on. Sometimes they're going to be people for which the measure is extremely harmful. And so I never came to a conclusion about whether you wanted to order the deal breakers or the non-deal breakers first. I think that there are reasons to do it both ways, but I never really concluded which one I thought was superior. Also, I just remembered somebody made a comment about the gerrymandering, and having unequal voting power. And that's something I mentioned very early in the video. So I don't want you to think that I skipped past that. I think that her comment about gerrymandering and so on was extremely valid, but I talked about that at the very beginning. So and why the abandonment of the 90% criteria? If the idea is to achieve consensus, shouldn't the need for a large degree of consensus persist? Yeah, I totally understand that. But I'm once again, I'm trying to emphasize a large reason why that I made the decisions about this modified consensus model was to avoid people who were trying to sabotage the process from allowing consensus to take place. If you're falling back to 2/3, then dang, you must have had quite a bit of pushback, but you've already done your best to address all of the concerns, because in the previous mode, you already addressed all the deal breakers and non-deal breakers. You literally made amendments to take into account all of their concerns. And after that, if you still have not achieved consensus, I totally get how some people would just say, don't do it. And that would possibly be a solution. But my solution was just to say, have it fall back to a supermajority. So that's one of those. I'd be open to all kinds of discussions. These technicalities of the voting system, I really appreciate that people looked so closely at them, but I also am not completely settled on any of those particulars. Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. So here we have RFV from the Status Counter-Revolutionary videos. The system in this video seems to be very similar to the system used in Soviet Russia directly after the October Revolution, except that the voting system is more complex, and I think too complex, and that intelligence worked differently, at least after the establishment of the Cheka, about 2 months after the October Revolution. But somehow you still seem to oppose the October Revolution. No, and this is what I say in response to that. I don't oppose the October Revolution. I oppose the claiming of the Russian Revolution by the Bolsheviks and the diversion from a system which I agree is very like what I'm proposing in this video, into a system wherein there was extreme nationalization campaigns, where state capitalism was imposed, wherein the workers were not given power over almost all industries that had any import to the struggle, the civil conflict. That's all laid out in the Status Counter-Revolutionary. So as I say in response, it's not that I oppose the October Revolution. In fact, what they did right afterwards was pretty fantastic. It's just that it only lasted a few months before Lenin proposed a draft decree that would destroy the system being described. So here we have another one that's just talking about the consensus. They say the largest possible majority is 100%. So when you draw the line at 90%, you contradict yourself. Not only that, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be 91 or 1%. Any line drawn would be arbitrary. No, the system is still pushing towards getting 100%. If you look at the way it's structured, it's attempting to get 100%. It's doing everything. It doesn't just start at 90%. It starts at attempting to get 100%. Even if it falls short of that, there are processes that take place beforehand where it's attempting to get 100%. The 90% is the first fallback. So this is why it's called modified consensus. It's not purely consensus. It's modified consensus. So it starts by trying to get 100%. If it can't get 100%, it falls back to 90%. If it can't get 90%, it falls back to 2/3. And it becomes increasingly difficult for it to do that as it proceeds. It needs more and more processes, more elaborate processes of deliberation. This person says, I would like to know, how do delegates work? Like, I understand they're recallable and stuff, but what do they do exactly and how? I'm pretty much just going to skip over this one because I answered it earlier in the video. This one is by Jet Pilot. They say, what defines affect? And they're talking about those who are affected decide. Is deciding not to show up to work affecting the coworkers? Am I forced to work? Is deciding to paint my house with a color my neighbor dislikes affecting my neighbor? Am I forced to not paint my house that color? Is my existence affecting everyone? Wow, they used an exclamation mark and a question mark there. And if you answer where the line should be drawn, why? Why is passing this line bad? What is unjust about crossing this line? This is a very unusual comment to me. It seems like they're purposely trying to miss the point. But at its base, it's a valid question, which is, how do you determine who is affected by any given decision? And therefore, who should be able to help make any given decision? First, I would say, pretty much as soon as any proposal is made, the proposal should come along with a description of who is affected. And of course, what that means is the council that represents, or that is composed of the people that are in question, would then become involved in deciding that proposal. So what I expect is that most proposals would begin with some form or scale of some kind of like exploratory committee, where they would start by saying these people are affected. Now, when it comes to you doing something that might affect someone else, then later they may make a proposal or they may bring into discussion in some or another council that something you did affected them and they want some form of recourse. I am very doubtful that anybody is going to agree that you painting your house a particular color has affected them in a way such that they should get to decide what color you paint your house. But even we can imagine some situations where that may occur. For example, where there are people who, like, let's imagine, it's not too far off what you're talking about. Somebody wants to put strobe lights out in front of their house. Well, you could say this is kind of just a purely aesthetic choice, but for people that are, that have like seizure conditions, this is not just a purely aesthetic choice. You are actually affecting their well-being in a future sense. And in that sense, if you answer where the line should be, the line being well-being, why is passing that line bad? What is unjust about crossing this line? I mean, it seems pretty obvious how harming someone else's well-being is like an obvious line you should not be crossing. If you want to have a discussion about ethics, that's fine, but we're talking about a situation where people can bring proposals to the councils. If somebody feels as if they are wronged, they can bring proposals to the councils, and the councils can make decisions together with those people in order to determine what the outcomes should be. I guess I understand the point of this question, but I do think this question displays a little bit of sort of like undue paranoia about what's going to happen. I do think that there could be situations where bad things might happen and people might abuse this process, but I think that it is going to turn out a lot better than a system wherein people have no power to affect their own autonomy and dignity, that they do not get to prevent other people from harming them. This seems like a much preferable system. A system wherein we err on protecting people's autonomy and dignity seems much preferable to me. Okay, so this one is from Anark, a very long comment. Unfortunately, I'm going to read all of it, but I think it's a pretty simple answer to their problem. Anark says, writing a constitution won't change a thing. I can write capitalism is finished and may never see its end. You can write basic needs guaranteed and suffer from starvation because of war, dry, etc. Writing won't change a thing. UCL wrote transphobia is bad and has still too much transphobic behavior. What's important is what you actually do to avoid the things that has been commonly described as dangerous. Not a new law nobody will read more nor apply, and suggesting that it will change often makes this even more useless, unless your constitution is a few rules like no dangerous behaviors and briefly the way the system works, which is not a constitution, even more if it is published massively and dealed everywhere in easy to read format. There's a reason anarchists are against constitution. It makes the illusion everything will change, whereas nothing will change. Democratic confederalism is not anarchy. It is inspired by an eco-socialist that had some proximity with anarchists, but it still has private property, work, money, and so on. And being anarchist doesn't prevent from problematic behavior like sexism, racism, and so on. I may seem to haggle, but I've seen this in the Union Communist Libertaire. Oh, that's what they mean by UCL. Libertarian Communist Union, which is not a trade union, and that's just a waste of time debating about text that never changed a thing, and I have a feeling that we are not doing anything concrete, and that even worse than that, debating text doesn't work to get to its so-called purpose, evolving. Here's an example. We righted and voted a text against transphobia. We said transphobia is bad, we should never be transphobic, etc., and we still live transphobia in the UCL. The situation is now even worse for trans people. Now every cis person is convinced that they are not transphobic, and it is way more difficult to struggle against transphobia inside UCL. In the meantime, UCL has done nothing concretely against transphobia in France, but also inside the UCL. Imagine this kind of problem caused by a constitutional functioning on a larger scale. Pardon my French, I'm literally French. And don't see this as an attack, but more as a way we can collectively prepare an anarchist society. I wish we could discuss more. I don't like writing long messages, and nobody likes reading long messages. So, I mean, I guess I agree with the basic premise of what they're saying, which is that obviously just writing it down doesn't do anything. But what I'm talking about here is actually producing social compacts that bound the structures that are taking place by everyone that is in the Confederation. So you are only able to build structures which can do particular things within the Confederation based on the constraints of that social compact everyone has agreed to. And if you don't, then previously discussed escalation of sanctions may take place, beginning with things which are relatively minor, mediation, discussions of social sanctions and so on, and then escalating more and more and more as people don't carry those things out. Like, the example that you're giving, it sounds like there's not anything being done about transphobia that is taking place. You didn't give any details, but I can't tell whether you're saying that people are being transphobic and just like there's nothing happening, which means that it sounds like you need to be creating some actual structural form of rehabilitative or restorative justice. Or you're talking about like transphobia in society, in which case then, what you're just saying is that the UCL is not carrying out actions to diminish transphobia in society, which seems like a very different sort of concern. Obviously, once again, because I don't have any details, it's hard for me to know what the failure is that's taking place here. But in a general sense, like, as I've said in previous comments, because everybody seems to be pointing out these sorts of issues, there are solutions to these problems. And I feel like this sort of skepticism of creating documentation and formal agreements is a general impediment. That documents, agreements, formal documentation creates expectations. And those expectations allow us to hold ourselves accountable to our expectations. We can build a contrast between our expectations and the things that we're actually doing. We could say, hey, look, we have these clear expectations. These clear expectations say that we're doing something wrong. And it allows us to sort of solidify that understanding. Whereas if you have none of that, then you don't really have any like concrete expectations which can be pointed to. And you have to re-debate everything. You have to re-litigate everything every single time. It's better, for example, that your group has written somewhere formally that they oppose transphobia. Now this allows you to say, okay, but you're doing these transphobic things. You can derive and demonstrate that there's a contrast between what you have written and what is being done. If that is not the case, there are 1,000 ways that people could divert. There's 1,000 ways people could change the topic. There's 1,000 ways they could just, focus on something else. So I get what you're saying, but I don't think that the approach that you're taking to solving the problem, which is to say to abandon formalization, is the correct method of approach. So like, obviously just formalizing it is not enough. It has to be also codified in action. And I agree with that 100%. But the criticism is coming in the form of the code of being against the codification, which I think is a mistake. You need both. You need the codification, the formalization, and you need action upon the things you have agreed to. Just one or the other isn't probably going to work out so hot. If you just do the action without the formalization, the action will probably not be long-lived. The action will probably sputter out. It will go off in different directions. The formalization allows you to maintain a course, where you can point to and say, remember when we all agreed to the course? So I say you need both. You need the formalization and the structuralization, and you also need action based upon the structuralization that you have made. Next one is by Ms. JJ. I think this one's kind of another misunderstanding. I'll read through it, but I think I've already answered it. I ask, these constitutional amendments, these decisions the majority decides on, these laws you speak of, how are they enforced? Yeah. As I've already said, this one I've answered numerous times. How are they enforced? A variety of different ways. You may or may not scale through the different severities, or you may start at one of the severities, but yes, they're not necessarily going to be enforced by violence by default like they are in this society. This person basically just seems to be assuming that because I use the word democracy, that must mean that I think that therefore I'm against free association, and that it's enforced by violence, and that it therefore isn't anarchist. Yeah, so it's kind of a repetition of previous misunderstandings. Yeah, rather than... is this a strange abstraction of legitimate anarchist theory and considerations? Yeah, really more that than anything else. I'm using language which people can recognize in this video. I'm not sticking to an anarchist orthodoxy of using particular words that are all appealing to anarchists. You know, like the anarchists would just call what I'm calling the Constitution, they would call the free agreement of the Confederation, right? And what I'm calling democracy, they would just call deliberation. And you know, like, it's like, that's all that's happening is I'm just using words that people actually recognize and identify with. And they go, oh, that's what you mean. One of the big problems that anarchists have is they're obsessed with these particular words, which most people don't understand what the heck these words even mean. And even after these words are described, people still don't really understand what's going on. And that's because a lot of anarchists are more obsessed with the aesthetic and not with the nitty-gritty of what's taking place. And I feel like this is exemplified in the fact that this video pretty much exactly says what it means, but because it uses particular words that people have knee-jerk associations with, for example, the word constitution or democracy, they essentially just assume a bunch of erroneous qualities, and those erroneous qualities come to them by way of theory or anarchist discussions with the anarchists that they've had, where they've sort of been misinformed and been given an understanding of these words that is different from what most people understand those words to mean. If you were to describe what an anarchist means by a free agreement, most people would just say, oh, okay, you mean like a contract? You mean laws? You mean a constitution? And the anarchists, instead of just going, yeah, okay, you could call it that, that's fine, they go, no, it's not that, or it's, you know, like, and most of the time that just serves to confuse people. Unfortunately, I think that's kind of what's happening here. You know, this is not meant to be an insult to this person at all, because numerous people obviously kind of made this same sort of comment, but it's just, or the fact that they're portraying Bookchin being a cynic who thinks it's too hard just to have a really democratic hierarchy, which is also false, just a misunderstanding of Bookchin. So it sounds like this person's kind of been, you know, inculcated with a lot of anarchist terminology, of which they have not really learned to discern from a bunch of more popular or mainstream terminology, which is what I'm attempting to do in this video. And their jab at Bookchin suggests to me they're probably surrounded by individualist anarchists who have misinformed them about Bookchin in a general sense. But yeah, I know that I'm kind of getting short on these, but also the video is kind of running long. So let's get moving. Let's see here. This person says, this style of government is fine ethically as long as it's voluntary. But as soon as this body of government seizes private means of production from capitalists, this no longer continues as a free society, but rather a tyrannical state. What you have outlined is fucking terrifying. And it still baffles me why many branches of anarchism, they put it in quotes, do not see the irony of advocating for any form of democracy, even from their own logic. So I think this person is an ANCAP because they are defending private property and they have a hate boner for democracy. So, yeah, I mean, the problem with ANCAPs in a general sense is they think that one group of people owning everything and everybody else being forced to sell their labor to those people, that's totally voluntary and normal. And therefore, they think that anybody defending themselves from that, anybody, trying to abolish capitalism, anybody trying to expropriate the means of production is carrying out coercion upon the poor, sad little puppy capitalists. They're being happened upon by all of these cruel, quote unquote, anarchists. Of course, this person doesn't understand is that anarchists have always been against private property. Anarchism is pretty much definitionally against private property. It's against capitalism. Capitalism is a force of coercion and hierarchical power. So, yeah, the fact they're baffled that anarchists are against capitalism means they don't really know what anarchism is. This person, Anderson Isowo, says, constitutional anarchism and a virtual state is probably the most functional form of anarchism that is not strictly utopian. The first one, once again, it's funny. I use this word constitution to try to communicate with normal people here. And for most people, it worked. And then a few people were like, oh, constitution? Oh, that sounds exactly like what we currently have. So yeah, constitutional anarchism is what I should call that. It's like just what I've been talking about. And a virtual state. Yeah, I don't think anything here can be described as a state. I respond to numerous people who are saying it's a state by being like, you should go learn more about what a state is. A state is an inherently centralized power structure wherein all of the means of legislation, the military, the decisions about financial institutions and legislation are made by a small group of people. It is the means by which people are alienated from the civil functions of society. This is literally the exact opposite. But anyway. We have another ANCAP. This isn't the Darwinist. Wow, that really bodes well for what they're going to say here. This isn't without rulers. This is everyone ruling everyone else all the time. Once again, coming from an ANCAP, that is a very entertaining thing to say. They're more concerned with everybody making decisions together and cooperating than they are with a small group of capitalists dominating all of society and owning everything about the economy to themselves and exploiting the masses of laborers. They have no problem with that. But if everybody makes decisions together, that is everyone ruling everyone else, you see. Consensus, that's rulership. But you having to work for a capitalist because otherwise you'll starve to death, that's voluntary because we defined it that way. Here's another one. Xanthar says, is constitution really necessary? Once again, there's just going to be an agreement that defines what everybody in the Confederation agrees to always, whether it's formal or informal. You know, you can call it a constitution, you can call it an agreement, you can call it a social contract. Whatever you call it, it's essentially the same. It's basically just if you are part of this group, you agree to this set of rules, this set of things. We hold these things. They're just points of unity, you might say. Okay. And obviously they can have differing forms of strictness, but it's funny how many people this word constitution just boiled their brain. No offense intended to this person. Lots of people said this, but yeah, like, point me to a single confederation or federation of any kind that does not have a unifying document. That's all that's being said in this video. This person, when referring to my rehabilitation communities, they say, you're literally, this is the glorious lobster emperor. So it sounds like they're a Jordan Peterson fan. You're literally just describing the gulags. I'm sorry, but it doesn't suddenly become wholesome, anarchist, horizontally structured people's rehabilitation communities just because you explain it in a lot of farty words. Farty words. That's a gulag. You reinvented the wheel, but declared it's not a wheel because you said so. I remember I responded to this one by basically just like saying this literally has nothing in common with a gulag. And I mean, it's like what I described earlier. You know, we're talking about like literally fully functional communities of people wherein they're getting therapeutic services and they're participating in democratic modes of existence, but they're just not allowed to interact with the rest of the populace. And my friends, that is apparently the gulags. And wow. If that was the gulags, I probably would not be nearly as anti-gulag. Turns out that was not the gulags. The gulags were, in fact, horrific work camps wherein the majority of people, or not the majority necessarily, but a lot of people died from being overworked and starving to death. That is not at all what was being described. This is just the hand-wringing of somebody who is probably very adjacent to fascism. Ah, yes. Here we have another ANCAP. It's funny because, you know, I screenshotted these as I went down the comments. And, you know, comments, I think the way it works is that they're prioritized by the number of likes and dislikes. So dislikes sorts you down and likes sorts you up. And so as we're getting close to the end here, we're getting the people who probably got disliked into oblivion, right? And that means we've got ANCAPs and fascists and capitalists and even a few anarchists arguing in bad faith. Not, those are to come. I'm not arguing that's what we just saw. But this person says, their name is Weozel, says, democracy is like two wolves and one sheep voting on what's for dinner. Capitalism without government intervention lets every person vote with his or her capital, and the money goes where it is needed without anyone dictating it. Pure freedom. No condom? All right. Well, yeah. What I point out is that capitalism is basically just the wolves voting on everything, right? Capitalism is just the wolves determining what the sheep do at all times, and the sheep just kind of get eaten at the whim of the wolves. So, you know, this phraseology here, democracy is like two wolves and one sheep voting on what's for dinner. You know that they are an ANCAP when they say that. Pretty much only ANCAPs say that. And it's because ANCAPs are deathly afraid of any form of accountability and cooperation. What they want is a society wherein the capitalists control everything, and they imagine themselves that they will be the capitalists and not the masses of laborers being subjugated by private militaries. So they are terrified of any form of, you know, deliberative decision making, because it means that they, in their minds, because they think they're going to be the capitalists, they will not get to exploit everybody else's masses of wage laborers. So they want to be the wolves, is essentially what it boils down to. They want to be the wolves, and they want masses of sheep to be eaten by them. Pure freedom, no condom, yes. Pure freedom, just in the same sense that slavery was something that people were free to do at one point. And yeah, that would be pure freedom. I would hope that this person who cares so much about pure freedom, no condom, would not be against slavery, because if they were, that would be violating the non-aggression principle by preventing that person from taking slaves. Yeah, so just that classic ANCAP inconsistency. And then Nicholas Duncan says, why democracy? This is another example. But this one here, I actually just included my responses because this is one of those where we kind of had a back and forth and they exposed what they meant by this question, why democracy? I respond, 1, consent is the basis of a moral society. 2, decentralized systems have less disastrous failure points. 3, the best way to manage a decentralized system is through consensus, and the best way to reach consensus is through democracy. And they say, no, why have any system at all? I say, because primitivism is disastrous and merely creates the fertile soil for the ensuing rise of feudal lords. They say, but does a lack of a system ensure primitivism? Just because there aren't systems for ensuring social norms doesn't mean that the life of man will be nasty, brutish, and short. I say, no, but it does mean that there will not be wide-scale social cohesion and cooperation, which will lead to a degradation of necessary services, leaving millions without necessary amenities, people with significant illnesses dead from lack of access to medication, diminishing shared infrastructure, leading to communication breakdowns, and all kinds of other disastrous outcomes. To abolish formal modes of cooperation and logistics would likely also lead to a fertile ground for the reemergence of the feudal lord, seeking to hoard power and therefore offer protection to alienated communities who would likely be suffering the wrath of other power hoarders. This is, after all, how feudalism originally arose. Early societies were quite admirable in many ways, yet when they lacked wide-scale cooperation, they were often able to be conquered individually. And when those power hoarders became too powerful for them to federate, they had to wall themselves off, separating them further from wide-scale cooperation with other medieval cities. The key is to maintain the formality for how we will interact with one another societally, but to reduce all coercion to non-existence. Democracy is the only thing that achieves this balance. They say, what if services are guaranteed by technology? I say, how, and who would implement and manage that technology? They say, well, in theory, other machines could, as well as people who like doing that. Most jobs today, especially the essential ones, can be automated. I appreciate you putting up with me, by the way. I'm an Anark kitty, and I know it must be difficult for you to see people like me making your side look bad. My vision for a perfect world is where anyone can do what they want, and no one has any authority over anyone else because machines do what they do, but better. And I say, I don't trust machines to know better what humans need than humans do, for the same reason I don't trust a centralized bureaucracy to know better than the masses do. All attempts to centralize decision-making inherently compresses context, and therefore leads to mangled decisions. Further, I find such a hypothetical system to be either A, very inflexible because no one is allowed the reins of control, and therefore the machinery is now stuck in one particular paradigm, regardless of changes or desired improvements in society, or B, hyper-authoritarian because some particular group of humans is given control over the machinery. Ultimately, the people who know best what they need will always be the humans themselves, and the only system which can manage that affair is some form of consensus. And no need to apologize. We all learn and grow through these sorts of dialogues. I think that's the last one I had from this discussion. Oh, okay, no, we have one more. No, I believe that since the machines will create not just a surplus, but an absurdly large one, they could accomplish good. I don't like hierarchy because humans having power over humans ain't that great, but I see no problem with, say, humans having power over dogs, cattle, etc. And so I have no problem with machines having power over humans. The main quandary I've been struggling with is the power handed to the people who make the initial machines, and I think a direct democratic approach would be the best there. The main issue I have with direct democracy and democracy in general is that it is ableist. This is the weirdest thing they say, I think. Side note, with AI, I don't think flexibility will be a problem. People will still be able to do their jobs, and whoever wants can decide what to do with the surplus, so I don't think there will be too much of a problem of people knowing what people need more than machines. That one, this is the comment, this was the weirdest one. I don't think I responded after this, but this doesn't really circumvent my problems. The reason I included this is because I think a lot of people have this naive idea that some form of technology is eventually just going to stand in and do all of the work for us. And the problem is that once, and I said this in a previous comment, so I won't reiterate too much, especially considering that this is now the longest Anark response. You don't want to centralize the power of decision-making into the hands of something that is not humans. You want to make sure that the decisions still default to humans. Now, humans could delegate power, right? They could delegate certain powers to these machines, and that might be fine. But insofar as the machines are making all of the decisions about how all of the surplus is managed, about what the structure of that machine society is, or of that, the technological structure of those machines, that's pretty dangerous, because then that means that humans aren't able to intervene to change the structure of those things. And if the machines make decisions we don't like, that may be illegible to us on one hand. And number two, it may not really be within our reins of control. So it's important that everything we create is a tool for the empowerment of our horizontal decision making, and not itself acting as the decision maker. So then basically here we just, I think towards the very bottom, these had been downvoted into oblivion. Basically just people repeating something like, Cake says, the People's Non-Authoritarian Democratic Correctional Facility. Anarcho prison. This is a state. What you describe in this video is a state. I find it very funny that the individualist anarchists and the authoritarian leftists try to conclude the same thing. I've actually made this criticism before that the individualist anarchist conception of what authority and a state is unfortunately very susceptible to basically just being, it's basically very compared to like Engels on authority, where, any form of power over is itself just the state. That any ability, it's on one hand, they are okay with individuals defending themselves, but as soon as a collective of individuals defends themselves, that's a state. And that's essentially the problem here. And that's the reason why side by side, you have essentially some individualist anarchists and a Maoist that basically was just trying to defend state capitalism in my other video, under my other videos, trying to claim that a horizontal system of deliberative decision making is a state, but it's not. And with that, we've finally made our way through the comments. I actually did not intend for this Anark response to be so long. I really didn't think that this would be the video that prompted me to ramble about every single comment, but it was. And if you have stuck around this long, I'd like to suggest that you, like the video. If you've been watching numerous of my videos, you should subscribe to the channel. If you have any thoughts or comments about this video, you should go comment below, whether it's negative or positive. It's fine with me. Maybe you'll make your way into a later Anark Responds. We'll go fractal, and I'll respond to Anark Responds comments infinitely. And then, everybody gets their time to argue with Anark on his channel. Lastly, if you like the work that I'm doing here, if you respect what I'm doing on this channel, if you want to help me live, buy groceries, etc., you should go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, ANARK. And, I'm pretty tired, so I think I'm just going to call it there, everyone. I'll see you next week.